Hello, I'm Robert Carlin, and welcome back to Reptiles and Amphibians Study, Part 2. So we're going to be starting out with Requirement 2, which is on U.S. reptiles and amphibians. So let's begin. So overall, there is around 460 species of reptiles and amphibians in the U.S. For the most part, they all tend to be on the east and south, on the eastern part of the U.S. and also in the south for reptiles. You can see that a bit more here. So the Southeast is actually it is one of the biggest hotspots for reptile and amphibian diversity in the world. And especially like for salamanders, we are probably the most biodiverse area for salamanders in the world. It's pretty cool. A lot of that has to do with how a decent portion of the Southeast is temperate rainforest. So that helps a lot with it. And you can also see this area here, that's the coastal plains. You see a lot of frog diversity there. Not as much salamander diversity, but there's a lot of really cool threatened frog species that live there and specialize in the sort of sandhill habitat that you see there usually. So yeah, you can see at the fall line, the number of species just sort of skyrockets a little. Then for reptiles, you see a lot of them here just because they like it where it's hot. These are more or less the hottest areas of the US. So you have a lot of diversity all throughout this area. And what's interesting, one fact that I learned recently, Kansas actually has it doesn't have the most biodiverse snake populations, but it has the most, I guess, compact snake population. So like in one hill, you'll have hundreds of snakes. So that's densities that you usually don't see, which is really interesting. Just goes to show that even though they don't have too many species, they still have some. Oh, went too far. Okay, so then part of the requirement is you have to talk about reptile amphibians in your area. So since I'm in Georgia, which is the Southeast, that's what we're talking about. If you are not in the Southeast, you might have to, you're going to have to do your own research on it, but don't worry, it's not that hard. So overall, the Southeast has the greatest diversity of salamanders in the world. We have one of the highest diversities of turtles in the world. Basically, just about everything except for crocodilians, I'd say. We have some of the most biodiverse areas in the world. So we have a lot of stuff. I mean, this is a picture that, like, there's some continents like Australia, they don't have a single species of salamander. This is one that I found outside of my house. This is a southern redback salamander. They look very similar, but southern and eastern redback salamanders look very similar, but they have very different ranges. So these are a species that you can see a lot in suburban areas, which is interesting. They aren't quite as common in rural areas, but they've thrived really well in suburban areas, which is very interesting. So some common southeastern species, you have eastern box turtles, which I list them as common in here because they are a very common group that you can find more or less anywhere in the Southeast. However, some populations are listed as threatened, depending on where you live. So that's not it's not a complete blanket statement for it. So this is a male one here. What's really interesting about box turtles is you'll see this a lot in turtles, just because they aren't able to move that fast. They can move decently fast, but they definitely are not super fast on land. What they've evolved is that the males will be very brightly colored, and that's so that during breeding season, if they see another turtle on the top of a hill, a male will be able to look over there and go, okay, is that another female turtle? Or is it a male one that I'm just going to more or less waste my time in going over there? So another super common species is the green anole. We have two species of anoles that live in the Southeast. The green anoles are the only native species. Brown anoles came from Cuba. There actually was a recent study that proved that they are more or less identical. So while brown anoles are considered to be a Georgia species now, just because they've been here for so long and they've established such a big population. They are still invasive, but they are listed in it. You'll see there's other species that, like Argentinian black and white tegus, have sort of tried to start making their way up from Florida. So we've had a couple random cases of them in South Georgia, but they aren't listed as a invasive species. Well, they aren't listed as a species here in Georgia, even though they're, it's a bit hard to explain. Another very common species is ringnecks. So they're called that because they have that little ring around their neck. What he's doing there is when they feel threatened, they have very brightly colored undersides. So they just sort of flip it around, hoping to try to scare predators off, because usually bright colors usually means, hey, I'm poisonous. Well, yeah, usually poisonous, but also occasionally venomous. You don't want to mess with me. And actually, in the case of ringnecks, they are mildly venomous, not enough to greatly affect humans. There's some reactions of some people having a mild allergic reaction to the venom, but nothing like big enough to even have to go to a hospital for at all. However, it is very potent against their primary prey, which is salamanders. A guy that I know he did some research on this on his own, not part of a research project or anything. He gave a salamander to one, it bit it, and then it almost died immediately from the poison, which is very impressive and very interesting. So you also have green tree frogs. That's one right here. We talked about them a little bit in the first part of the merit badge. So they are the state amphibian of Georgia. They're very, very common and pretty little species, really. Then you also have red salamanders, which I'd say they're probably my favorite salamander. They're very, very pretty salamanders. They usually find them around streams, but they're very, very pretty salamanders. I mean, look at that orange. Some of them are more brownish than orange, but this is a very colorful one. And then also American alligators. While these aren't ones that like you can find anywhere in the Southeast, they are now a very common species in their habitats. It used to not be so. They used to be on the endangered. Well, I know that they used to be threatened. I'm not sure about the endangered species list, but they were being hunted a lot for their skins to make clothing and accessories out of. But now they have rebounded a lot now that there's protections in place for them, which is really, really cool. So they're a very, very interesting species. And the only native Georgia crocodilian. We also have 2 more species of crocodilians in the Southeast, one more native and an invasive one. There's the American crocodile, which those are in the very, very south of Georgia, so like the Everglades, a little bit in the Keys. They're a very, very cool species, Crocodilius acutus. Then there's also spectacled caimans, which are an invasive species that have established them a little bit. They've established themselves a little bit in the Everglades, not too much, but enough to be considered there. Okay, requirement 4. Why are reptiles and amphibians important to the environment? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. One reason is that they can act as prey to other animals. So other reptiles and amphibians are more than happy to eat them. Usually, they're very opportunistic feeders. Birds of prey will frequently eat them, and also mammals a lot. So coyotes, like most mammals would have no problem, like if they found like a small lizard or a small snake or something, they would have no problem with eating it. And like possums, raccoons commonly raid turtle nest. They also act as predators. So snakes usually help to keep down rodent populations. Most snakes are pretty opportunistic feeders, but a lot of them do eat a lot of rodents, which helps keep down populations a lot. So if you don't want rodents in your house, you might want to have a snake in your property. That's very useful. Another example is snapping turtles will eat any sort of dead stuff in rivers and lakes. What's interesting about that is search and rescue teams have actually used snapping turtles before to find dead bodies because they have a very good sense of smell underwater. So they just go to the body because they're planning on eating it, and then the search and rescue team just has it attached to a leash, and they just follow it there. Another reason that they're important is because some of them are what is called a keystone species. So a keystone species is one that more or less the entire ecosystem is built off of. So if you know anything about like building arches and stuff, the keystone is the very top piece that all the force in the arch is sort of directed onto that. So as long as that remains stable, chances are your arch is going to last a pretty long time. But once that's gone, the arch tends to crumble down on itself. So one good example of a keystone species is gopher tortoises. More or less, their whole habitat and all the animals in it rely on them. So they make these giant burrows. They can be 45 feet long, which is really cool. They provide shelter to dozens of other species, including other endangered and rare species, because gopher tortoises are a threatened species. So one example is indigo snakes. They typically use gopher tortoise burrows. They will also eat young gopher tortoises. Indigo snakes are a really cool species. We'll talk about them in a second. Another species that lives in there is gopher frogs, which are probably the rarest species of frog in the Southeast, which is really cool. Okay, protected species in the Southeast. This is requirement 4. So one that we just talked about is gopher tortoises. They are federally endangered due to habitat loss. They have taken they've taken a pretty big beating from habitat destruction. Yeah, they are not doing too great. So there's a lot of conservation groups that are working with them. Like, you know, that the Georgia DNR does a lot of work with them. Pretty cool. Pine snakes. So these are a really interesting species that all the ones that says state threatened or state rare, those are listed as that. In Georgia, they might differ in your state. So this is a eastern pine snake. They're a very, very cool species that we don't really know that much about. So they're threatened due to habitat loss and deforestation, and also due just to a lack of information about them. They are a very secretive, more or less completely fossorial species of snake that is very, very hard to find. So there's a really interesting project called Project Pine Snake going on that is devoted to finding out more about pine snakes and doing what we can to conserve them. Another species, this one amphibian, is a hellbender, which is a type of salamander. They're very big salamanders. They're actually considered to be the largest salamander in the US and one of the largest in the world. Their cousins are the largest salamanders in the world. They're all in the family Cryptobranchus. It's the Chinese and Japanese giant salamanders, which those things can get huge. So they are state rare, but being considered for federal listing. And the reason that they're threatened is due to habitat loss and bycatch. So they rely more or less on fast-moving, clear water sources with lots of big rocks in it that they can hide under and lay their eggs under. So a lot of that is destroyed by habitat loss, not necessarily in the water system itself, but also just on the areas around it. Then any sort of dirt or sediment comes in, and then you've just killed off every single hellbender. They're very, very sensitive to environmental changes. They're also bycatch usually, so fishermen will catch them, and then they think they're eating the fish that the fishermen are going after, so they kill them, which they are not. Well, they are a little bit, but honestly, the fish that they're trying to catch are eating more of their same species than hellbenders are. Then you also have gopher frogs. They're only considered state rare in Georgia. They probably should be a bit higher in my opinion, but they are threatened due to habitat loss. They're tied in more or less completely with gopher tortoises. As gopher tortoise burrows disappear, so do gopher frogs, which is not good. They're a very interesting species. So yeah, they're considered to be the rarest frog species in Georgia and probably the Southeast too. Okay, so this is requirement 1. It is one of the requirements that we are unable to do in this type of class. So the requirement is to describe the characteristics of 6 species of reptiles and 4 species of amphibians in the U.S. And then for any 4, make sketches from your own observations or take photographs, show markings, color patterns, characteristics that are important, the identification of the 4 species, and also discuss the habits and habitats of all 10 species. So this is one that overall is not too hard to do. Just do it. Well, it's not too hard to do, but we can't do it in a class setting like this. So this is going to be one that you're going to have to do on your own and then go to a merit badge counselor to get it signed off. So here are some good resources for requirement 1. One very good one is the Savannah River Ecology Lab. Part of their site is completely devoted to herpetology. It's a very, very good resource for any sort of Georgia or South Carolina species of reptile or amphibian. Another good one is the Amphibian Foundation. They're a really cool organization in Atlanta that it's devoted to amphibian conservation. So they have really good information about some threatened species of Georgia amphibians. And then also any AZA, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, accredited zoo or aquarium. So some of the big ones here in Georgia and Tennessee at least, are Zoo Atlanta, Georgia Aquarium, Tennessee Aquarium, Chattanooga Aquarium. Any of those, if it's an AZA accredited zoo, that means it meets certain guidelines to ensure that they are giving all the animals that they have the best care that they can, and the best care that they can get and the best care that they need. And also ensures that they have good educational resources for the species. So any sort of AZA accredited zoo is going to be a very good resource for doing research. Okay, requirement 7, venomous reptiles. This is a fun one. So here in the US, overall for venomous reptiles, there are 4 major groups. There is vipers, which those are snakes like rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, copperheads, stuff like that. You also have elapids, which are coral snakes, cobras, mambas, taipans, which for the most part, elapids are considered the most venomous and most dangerous groups of species of snake in the world. Every single one of the top 10 species of venomous snakes are elapids. There's also colubrids, which are, some colubrids are venomous, some are not. So colubrids are more or less every single other species of snakes, like a rat snake, a black racer, a coach whip, indigo snake. Those are all colubrids, but some of them are venomous, some of them very venomous. So boomslangs are an African species that they are very, very, very venomous. The genus Boiga, which is mangrove snakes and a couple of others, they're also mildly venomous. Occasionally, you will have some reported fatalities from it. Not often, though. Some U.S. species have a very mild venom. Some species of colubrids have a very mild venom. So like we talked about the ringneck snakes earlier, they are technically venomous, but not dangerously venomous. There's a couple of other species that have very trace amounts of venom. And then there's also venomous lizards. So a lot of venomous lizards are heliderms, which are Gila monsters, and beaded lizards. There are 4 species of beaded lizards that their venom is interesting because for most snakes and also for the other lizards that are venomous, their venom evolved as a method of catching prey. Not necessarily for defense, but it can be used for that. Heliderms, they specifically evolved their venom just for defense. So that's why their venom usually will not kill you. We'll talk about more we'll talk a little more about that later. So some other venomous lizards are Komodo dragons. One longtime myth is that the reason that they're dangerous is bacteria in their saliva. That's not actually true. There was actually a study done that did the analysis of Komodo dragon venom versus other lizard, Komodo dragon saliva versus other lizards. And overall, they have the same quantities of bacteria in their mouth. There's actually some lizards that have dirtier mouths from the bacteria that you're more likely to have something bad happen to you from the bacteria in their venom, in their saliva. What Komodo dragons do is they have some modified glands in their bottom jaw that put the venom into their saliva, and then when they bite, it's what's called a anticoagulant, which means that it prevents your blood from clotting. So what they do is there is a artery behind the leg of all mammals. They go for that and try to rip it out, and even if they don't succeed in that and you don't die immediately, the venom is going to keep you bleeding, so you continue to get weaker, and they're just going to keep trying again and again and again. They're also very fast lizards. They're very interesting. There's also been some other species of lizards recently that have been found to have very, very mild venom, but for the most part, these 6 lizards here are the most venomous lizards. Okay, IDing Georgia venomous snakes. Is this still? Okay, yeah, this is still part of requirement 7. So in Georgia, we have 6 snakes. 6 venomous snakes total. So we have one elapid, which is the coral snake. You can see that one here. That's a eastern coral snake. They are usually a smaller snake they have the red, black, and yellow markings. You probably have heard the saying, red next to black, friend of Jack, or red next to yellow can kill a fellow. There's a whole bunch of variations of that, but they all have more or less the same thing. That is an okay way to go at best. It's not perfect by any means, because you can have different patterns in coral snakes, in the same species of coral snakes, where they look nothing like that. However, that's a good guide to go by. If you do see something like that, it's probably not a good idea to pick it up. And you can also just throw that completely out the window if you leave the US. Like in Mexico, there's not hundreds, there's tons of different species of coral snake that look identical to non-venomous snakes, but are definitely a lot more likely to kill you. So we also have copperheads, which here's a copperhead here and here and here. That the way that you can identify them is you look for the Hershey kisses on the side. So if you look on the side there, you can see that sort of triangle. That's the Hershey kiss I'm talking about. You can see it occasionally a little bit in water moccasins, also known as cottonmouths, but it's not consistent. Like you can see this one has a little bit more of a banding there, but then a little bit more of a triangle there. Eastern copperheads have the triangles. There's also banded copperheads, which look identical to these, except they have bands, but they aren't native here, so we aren't going to talk about them right now. Then you also have cottonmouths, which are these two. They're a bit more of a heavy-bodied snake, and the reason that they have the name cottonmouth is because when they're threatened, they sort of sit back and then open their mouth, and the inside of their mouth has this sort of pinkish, cottony color, and that's where they get the name from. Yeah, that's usually the easiest way. Well, that's something that saved a lot of people from getting bit by them, because they don't see that they're about to step there, but then they open their mouth and it's this flash of white. So it sort of breaks up the image, so people are more likely to notice it. Continuing with Georgia venomous snake IDs, since we only talked about 3 out of the 6, there is also 3 species of rattlesnake here in Georgia. So there's eastern diamondback rattlesnakes, which, hold on, you can see 2 of them here. They are the largest species of venomous snake in the US. They are pretty big. They're very, very interesting species. They have a very large, broad head, and to identify them, well, one very good way to identify a rattlesnake is look for a rattle on the tail. If they have that, chances are it's a rattlesnake. They also have large, now I'm going back to it, large diamond-shaped markings. You can't really see them super well in this picture. Let's see. Next is the timber rattlesnake, which they have a very heavy body with zigzag markings down their back. They're very pretty snakes. You may have also heard of a canebrake rattlesnake. That is not, it used to be considered a separate species or subspecies of them, but now we know that all it is just another color morph of the timber rattlesnake. It's one that you usually see more down in South Georgia, particularly on the barrier islands. And the final species is the pygmy rattlesnake. So this is a pygmy rattlesnake here. They are called pygmy rattlesnakes because they are very small. Surprise, surprise. They have a very tiny, usually hard to hear rattle, so that's something that can be a little bit more dangerous about them. While they probably aren't going to kill you with their venom, it's not going to be pleasant, but it's hard to hear the rattle occasionally. You can also, one good way to identify them is look for lateral spots. So these spots here, all down the side, that's one good way to identify them. The thing is for them, their coloration can differ in between the different populations. So like the ones in South Carolina tend to be, well, the ones higher up, like in Tennessee and South Carolina, tend to have more of a red tint, but then the ones in like South Georgia will look like this with the more gray and then red spots. So there's a lot of really interesting color variants in them. Oh, here's another Eastern Diamondback. Look at him, he's so pretty. So what to do if you encounter a venomous snake? First thing is, don't go near it. About 80% of venomous snake bites happen when people try to kill or harass a venomous snake. So by not going near it, your chances of getting bit have gone down. They are not aggressive. They will not go after you. They are not going to chase you down to try to kill you. If you think that they're chasing you down, all that it is you are standing in between them and their shelter, and they're trying to get to it. Chances are they aren't going to move at all. They're just going to sit there and just try to look as threatening as they can to try to prevent you from getting near them. That being said, if you get close enough and scare them enough, they will bite you. Occasionally, there will be dry bites for venomous snakes, which is basically where they just bite you, but they don't inject venom. Those are pretty rare. If they do inject venom, for all the species of snake in Georgia at least, for all the venomous ones, chances are you will not die. However, you can die from it. And no matter what, it will not be a pleasant experience. You will be in more or less constant pain. It is not good. So yeah, don't go near venomous snakes unless you know what you're doing. So, say you have made a mistake and you have been bit by a venomous snake. We're going to use a different person. So not you, somebody that you're with has been bit by a venomous snake. What do? First thing to do, get the person away from the snake. Chances are the snake is not going to be interested in going again. So if you try to get them away, you should be pretty safe. Chances are it will have already run off because it's terrified. So just make sure that you are not going to be the second victim. I mean, that's something for any sort of wilderness first aid thing. Just make sure you are not the second victim. The next thing you want to do is call 911. Anything you might have heard about, like sucking the venom out or something, that's completely useless and frankly stupid. You cannot do that. What you need to do is you need to call 911. That's the first step. Let them know, hey, my buddy was bit by a venomous snake. Here's where we are. Please come and help. Then what you want to do is say, let's see, can you see my arm in the camera? Cool. So say you get bit here. What you want to do is you want to put a pressure bandage on. However, you don't want to put it on here. What you would want to do is either put it on here or maybe here. And that's what a pressure bandage is it's like a step in between a normal bandage and a tourniquet, where it's not completely cutting off blood flow, it's just restricting blood flow. That way the venom is less likely to move through your system. And then what you also want to do is you want to try to hold it as level to your heart as possible. Do not hold your arm up, because if you got bit in the arm, you're just now making gravity make it move even faster, which is not good. Do not try to catch the snake for the doctors. For antivenom, what it usually is it's more or less generalized. So if it's a rattlesnake, there is one antivenom that's used for that. If it's a copperhead or cottonmouth, which is they're what's called achistrodontids, there is one antivenom for that. There is one antivenom for coral snakes. So they don't need to have the actual snake. They don't to get an idea on it. They're able to tell usually just from the reactions that your body is going through, and by just doing some other tests, they're able to tell, okay, this is what it is. And then while you're at the hospital, the doctors will give you antivenom if they see it as necessary. Sometimes you don't actually need antivenom. You just need painkillers, and then your body will be able to take care of it on its own. That being said, you shouldn't just be get bit by a venomous snake and go, well, I'm just going to go home and just rest in bed. That's a bad idea. You want to go to the hospital. Will it be expensive? Yes. However, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to die if you go to the hospital. Your chances of dying are definitely going to be a lot higher if you stay at home. And also, if you've ever seen any of the you can buy antivenom for if you get bit by a venomous snake or if your pet does. Yeah, about that. No, just really doesn't work at all. And also, when it comes to the dosage, the doctors are the ones who are able to make that call best. You don't want to kill yourself because you got bit by a venomous snake and then you injected yourself with too much antivenom and then killed yourself from it. You don't want to do that. Leave that to the professionals. Leave it to the doctors. They're the ones who know what they're doing, not you. Okay, continuing with venomous reptile first aid, venomous lizards. There's more or less the same steps where you want to get away from the lizard, you want to call 911, apply a pressure bandage. The only difference is there is no antivenom for venomous lizards in the US. That is because their venom is completely defensive. It is not an offensive venom. So it's not trying to kill you with it. It's just trying to make you hurt and get away. And it does that very well. So the doctors will give you pain medication, but that's about all they can do. What's going to happen, the symptoms last around 3 days, and what the symptoms are is you feel like every single fiber of your body is on fire. It is unimaginable pain. You are vomiting. You have explosive diarrhea. It is just nasty, and it's painful, and life just generally sucks. It's not fun. It will be the worst pain you have ever felt, probably. But unless you have a severe allergic reaction, the venom is not going to kill you. I've never heard of an actual fatality from a heloderm venom, since, like I said, it is completely defensive. It is only there because they want to make sure that you don't bother them anymore. So, yeah, don't bother them. Okay, requirements 8 and 9. So these are the other two that you have to do on your own. Requirement 8 is you have to observe a reptile or amphibian either at your house or at a zoo or aquarium for a certain amount of time and record it. So, wait, here. I'll get the actual full requirement. Going all the way back. So what the requirement is you have to either maintain a reptile or amphibian for a month, and then record what all it eats, how it eats, changes in coloration, shedding its skin, or just general habits. Or if you have a egg of a reptile or amphibian, keep it until either hatching or metamorphosis. And then you just keep a record of it and then talk to your counselor about it. The other option is choose a reptile or amphibian at a zoo, aquarium, or nature center or something. And then you just study the specimen weekly for 3 months, and then each visit sketch it in its habitat. Or I guess you could probably also be able to take pictures of it. And also note any changes in coloration, shedding, general habits and behavior. Discuss the overall husbandry and care for it with your counselor. And also, one very good way to do that is talk to the keepers for it. and then also find out a little bit more about its natural history and stuff. And then requirement 9 is the easiest one to do is using visual aids. Give a brief talk to a small group on 3 different reptiles and amphibians. That's overall the easiest one to do, especially during this time. If you know frog calls or are willing to learn some and are near an area where you have frogs breeding, then you can do A, or if you're able to, you can do B. But at this time, that's probably not the easiest one to do. So let's go back to it. So yeah, so some options for requirement 8. If you have a reptile or amphibian at home, like this is my Russian tortoise Ivan, you can do that requirement with them, where just observe them daily for however long it said. If not, you can check to see if there's any live cams or anything with reptiles or amphibians. I know that Georgia Aquarium has one for some alligators. I've looked around, but I haven't been able to find any others. Maybe you'll have more luck than me. Then for requirement 9, like I said, the easiest is probably to do part C with your family or any other group that you can safely talk with. Just record it in some way and then send it to your counselor. For like I said, for part A, if you know frog calls and are confident enough, just record the calls and identify them. Then you got it. And for part B, the best way to do this would be taking pictures of wild reptiles or amphibians, identifying them, and then sending the pictures with identification to the merit badge counselor, which might not be super feasible depending on where you are and where all you're able to go right now. So like I said, part C is definitely going to be the easiest one to do. Okay, requirement 10, the final requirement, reptile and amphibian myths. So there's a whole, reptiles and amphibians are groups of animals with tons of myths about them. Almost every single one is not true. So here's one. Snakes with triangular heads are venomous. This is false. So this here looks like a banded water snake. This is a non-venomous species, but it has a triangular head. The reason for that is because while most pit vipers, so cottonmouths, copperheads, and rattlesnakes, they do have more of a triangular shaped head. Not all of them, but most. So what they're doing with this is a defensive display from the snake. He's trying to look like it to try to scare any sort of predator off by looking like, hey, I'm venomous, you don't want to mess with me. So not always. And they'll also do this to try to try to increase surface area for basking so that they're able to absorb more heat. Next. This is probably one of the weirdest myths I've ever heard. Copperheads smell like cucumbers. No. No, no, and no. I have no idea where this came from. Chances are somebody happened to smell cucumbers, saw a copperhead, and went, well, I must have smelled cucumbers because of the copperhead. Yeah. Copperheads do not smell like cucumbers. That is not a good way to tell. Smelling cucumbers is a good way to tell if there's a cucumber nearby, not so much for copperheads. Next, toads give you warts. No. There is no actual records ever of toads giving you warts. I have no idea where this came from, but apparently the myth was that if you touch a toad, you can get warts from it. Chances are if you touch a toad, all that's going to happen is it's going to try to hop away and probably pee on you. That's one of their major defenses. Yeah. This is another weird one. Coach whips can bite their tail and roll down hills. So there's tons of stories of coach whips like biting their tails and then just sort of rolling their way down a road. That is not true at all. Coach whips are a very fast species of snake. Some people consider them to be the fastest species of snake in the US. So they are very, very fast. However, they do not bite their tails. Milk snakes drink milk from cows. Once again, this is another one that is just, I have no idea where this came from. But the myth was that milk snakes would hang out in barns so they could go and sneak up on cows to drink milk directly from the udders. Yeah, that's wrong. If you find a milk snake in your barn, it's because it's looking for mice or other rodents, not milk. They do not drink milk. Yeah, so that one's just wrong. Here's another one. The only good snake is the dead snake. Completely false. So as we discussed earlier, there's a whole lot of reasons that snakes are beneficial to their ecosystems. And in many cases, their ecosystems rely on them. And if people usually use this as an excuse for why they killed a snake, once again, most venomous snake bites happen when people try to kill a venomous snake. So don't try to kill it, and then you won't get bit. It's very easy. Also, something that not a lot of people know, a lot of states, including Georgia, have laws that prohibit killing non-venomous species of snake. So no matter where it is, you are not allowed to kill it, especially if it's a threatened species. There isn't, well, when it comes to private property, you are allowed to kill a venomous snake on it if you see it as absolutely necessary. However, on public property, it is illegal to kill a venomous snake. Yeah, they're very beneficial to the environment. You killing it is doing more harm than good. So thank you. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for listening, and I hope you guys have luck with the other 3 requirements. Thank you.